This season, a new hot deal has arrived at Metro. $25 a line for 4 lines with all the data you need and 4 free Samsung Galaxy A15 5G phones. Getting Metro's best deals is easy. No ID required, no activation fees. Get a new number or keep your own. It's up to you. That's 4 lines for $25 a line, plus 4 free phones. Visit a store or go online today. Only at Metro by T-Mobile.
When you join Metro Plus Tax. For a limited time and subject to change. Max 1 offer per account.
Is there anything better than being stabbed? Yes, being stabbed repeatedly. Or at least that's what the slasher genre would have us believe. To get to the bottom of this and other deeply complex questions, Jacob and Alexander have sat down with New York Times best-selling horror author Stephen Graham Jones, the foremost acolyte of the slasher working today. They got into a lively and deadly conversation filled with thrills, chills, and horrifying revelations about Alexander's ancestors. Once again, these interviews would not be possible without the support of our patrons on Patreon. So if you enjoy our work, please consider signing up. You'll get access to an ad-free RSS, bonus stories, a behind-the-scenes discussion for every episode, and more. But for now, Stephen Graham Jones.
Hello, I'm Jacob Duarte Spiel.
I'm Alexander Saxton.
And we have a special interview today. Here with us is a true maverick of fear. He's been carving out new territory for 30 years across dozens of books and hundreds of stories. He puts the gore in allegory. He puts the stab in established horror genius. The master of splatter, the Don Corleone of rusty machetes. It's Stephen Graham Jones.
Oh, man, thank you for having me. What an intro. Thank you.
I told you it sounded like I was introducing a wrestler.
That's great, man. That's great.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I'm honored. I'm honored to talk with y'all.
Oh, thanks. I wanted to start you with 2 tough questions before we go any further, because I think that these questions are going to both tell our audience everything that they need to know about you and also tell us everything that we'll need to know about you. They might be impossible questions, but I want to see what you can do. So 1, if you had to be killed in a slasher, how would you want to go out? And 2, if you were the killer in a slasher, what would be your method of slashing?
You know, if I had to die in a slasher, or really if I were in a slasher, then I think I would die. So that's really the question. If I were in a slasher, how would I die? And I'm fairly confident I would be one of the couple in the car at Lover's Lane in the first 5 minutes who gets menaced and stalked and hung from above the car. And I think that's great, man, because you're the blood sacrifice that lubricates the rest of the narrative. And also you get to make out, you know, so there's no loss, you know.
You're not hearing a mysterious noise and going out checking in the woods. You're not that guy. You're oblivious.
An honorable death.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't get terrorized. Like, I always think that terrorization in slashers is really tenderizing the meat, you know, and I wouldn't get tenderized really. I'll just make out and get slashed, and that's a good time, you know. Oh, and what if I were the killer in a slasher, what would my chosen method of slashing be? You know, I think y'all probably have seen High Tension, what is it, a French movie, right?
French. Yeah.
And that woman in that wields that big cutoff saw, which is it looks like about 150-pound saw, you know, and it is wicked when it catches you. But I think this is very important for the balance you need in a slasher. It's so unwieldy that it slows the killer down, you know, so it evens the odds a little bit, and it makes things draw out longer. Because yes, if you ever get bitten by this saw, it's all over for you forever. But as long as you can keep it a steady jog, you can probably avoid the saw, you know.
So if you're a slasher, you're trying to create opportunities for people to keep it dynamic on screen.
It's got to be fair. Yeah, it's got to be fair. I mean, it's like when you read a Superman comic, and they always have to make it fair for the bad guys, the villains, by somehow, you know, exposing Superman to Red Sun or all the things they do to make him weaker, to make it uneven, you know. And it's a better story when Superman doesn't just walk in and instantly own everything, you know.
Yeah. That's true. There's not many 2-page Superman comics, but there could be a lot of them if they wanted.
Yeah.
So now that we've got the hard questions out of the way, for our listeners who might not have read your work or maybe have read only a little bit, you know, how would you describe your writing style and the sort of things that you write about? I think we just gave people a big hint with those last 2 questions, but
Well, number one, I mean, I do a lot of horror and my stuff. I try not to shy away from the gore, the blood, the terror, but also to me, those moments of, blood on the wall, spatter in the eyes, all that stuff, that's really just set up for the tender moments. The tender moments are my favorite moments to write. Like an example would be in my novel from 2012, I think, The Last Final Girl. It's over the
Mhm.
top. There's a guy in a Michael Jackson mask who is called Billie Jean running around killing people, And, and it's just like there's just heads flying everywhere. It's over the top. And there's a horse's head that gets cut off even, But so it's over the top. But my favorite moment of that novel is at a high school homecoming. This unlikely girl has been kind of lured into the homecoming court, and her father is supposed to walk her out at halftime of the big game. And her father have like a not a great relationship, and he's a hard drinker. And so she's on that ramp ready to go out and have her moment in the sun, basically. And her father is not there. He's not there, and he's not there. And it looks like this is going to be an emotional downbeat. And then her little brother, who they've been sniping at each other the whole story, he shows up in a suit. He's like 12 years old and she's 17. He shows up on that ramp in a suit that's too big for him because he knew his dad wasn't going to make it. And those are the moments I write for.
Oh, that's
Mhm.
nice.
So why do you shroud them in the blood and the saws then?
Because I think the contrast or the 180-degree turn to the almost sentimental or tender moments, I think that those moments hit harder when you have to wade through knee deep blood to get there. If you see if I'm here in Colorado on the trail and I see a whole field of flowers, columbine flowers, then I'm like, yeah, that's pretty. If I am up on the tundra at the Arctic Circle and I look out, it's bleak whiteness everywhere, but there's one flower growing out there, and that flower means so much more than a field of flowers.
Mhm.
Well, it's really interesting that you have zeroed in on the tenderness of your work as
Mhm.
sort of the crux of it, because when I've been reading your work, what I've really focused on is how funny it is.
Thank
I
you.
really narrowed in on the comedy. The relationship between comedy and horror for Jacob and I is sort of like
Yeah.
an old saw for us, because we both started out as comedy writers and then became horror
Oh.
writers. And I'd be really interested to hear what your take is on the relationship between those two genres.
Yeah, to me, especially the slasher is like, and I
Mhm.
think this is in My Heart is a Chainsaw. Jade kind of says it. It's a coin that's flipping through the air, and on one side, it's like the theater mask. On one side, it's tragedy, terribleness. On the other side, it's laughter. And that's how the slasher works. It goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and that in a broader sense, the way comedy works in horror for me, or humor. There probably is a subtle difference that I'm not aware of between comedy and humor, but it works as a pressure release valve because horror wants to go climb the steep slope up to a plateau of screechiness, and
Mhm.
it does that really quickly. Good horror does that really quickly, but if it stays on that plateau, then we the reader become kind of not interested in it anymore because it's
Mhm.
monotonous. It's just a
Mhm.
screech for the rest of the narrative. What comedy does, it allows it to be a spiky forward motion. It resets and then you climb again, and it resets and you climb again. And I mean, the cat in the closet, like you see it in
Yeah.
Alien, Jonesy,
Mhm.
that resets us. It resets our tension, and it also keeps us kind of wrong-footed. That we don't know if that's going to be the xenomorph in the closet or if it's going to be Jonesy
Mhm.
again. And also, y'all probably picked up on this. Lately we've had people with comedy backgrounds doing really good horror,
Oh yeah.
and
Jordan
I
Peele.
think the reason for
Mhm.
that is that the tension is the same in comedy and horror. It's tension, tension, release, tension, tension, release.
Set up punchline.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And sometimes the punchline is a shish kebab through the mouth, like "Happy Birthday to Me." But
Oh my God, that's so funny you
uh,
mentioned that.
my grandfather wrote that.
really,
Yeah, yeah,
oh, that's amazing. That's
yeah.
amazing. I love "Happy Birthday to Me," man.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
like kid with the two little white rats, that my dad
Yeah.
had like two little white rats as a kid. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that is the coolest. That's
Hmm.
the coolest. I love
I've
that.
Also,
I've never ever heard anyone mention that film. And then I was reading like My Heart is a Chainsaw. There's like a reference to Happy Birthday to Me like every 10 pages. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. My dad's gonna be so happy.
Oh, that is so cool. You know what? And talking to random slasher associations, the chair of my department, I'm a professor at CU Boulder.
Yeah.
He was in the original Sleepaway Camp back in
Okay.
Oh shit,
early
really?
80s. Yeah, I know.
Oh, I watched that really recently. Before I knew that we were, that's actually one of my girlfriend's favorite movies. So we had a blast watching it.
Yeah.
I also, Alexander, do you want to out your grandfather for writing a different movie as well?
Oh, have you ever heard of Ilsa She-Wolf of the SS?
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he wrote that too.
Wow.
Yeah, he's got a whole catalog of B movies. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's wonderful. That
And
so
if
cool.
you're wondering if I like grew up in a mansion with all of that happy birthday to me money, the answer is no.
What cracks me up about Happy Birthday to Me, which I love it, is the top 10, those students that they're like, this used to be a staple of the slasher probably before Scream 4. It was, I mean, that, which is a long time. The kids playing these high schoolers were always like 30 years old, and that made it like, I mean, number one, you can, I don't know why they got cast actually, but the result is that when they die, I feel less sad because I'm like, yeah, they probably did something bad. They're 30 years old. If they're 17 and dying, I'm like, but they still had so much potential, and which is why for me, Scream 4 was good, but it was a different kind of horror because these kids looked like they were 17, and I was feeling bad for them dying.
In the original Scream, I kind of feel that way about Campbell. It's just like watching her run around, and it's kind of like, ooh, like if she really looks the part. It's
she does.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned Nev Campbell. Y'all can see this. People on the podcast can't see it. It's a it's signed by Nev Campbell. Somebody just gave it to me yesterday. Yeah.
That's so nice.
It's also because of your background sort of phasing in and out of reality in a unsettling way.
Alexander, you got to send him a shish kebab signed by you.
Yeah, sure.
That would be great.
Dig up my granddad, use his hand to sign the shish kebab.
And send it to Colorado.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think you're right about this, like the relationship between comedy and horror being this like spiky sort of thing. And what you were mentioning about Jonesy, I was thinking the exact same thing about, when the killer turns out to be a cat in the closet or whatever. That is itself a joke. Like that is a joke. And it's all about, when you're saying like tension release, to me it's like expectation and then subversion, and subversion. And the difference between comedy and horror is that it's whether that subversion is going to be a scare or a joke, really. Like, is it going to be a punchline or is it going to be someone dead?
Exactly. I was in like a doctor's office years ago, and I was just reading some random doctor magazine, which they probably don't call it doctor magazines. They just call it magazines, I'm sure. But the little thing I read, I don't think I read all of it, was that until the moment of eruption, physiologically, if they put a scan on somebody, probably not X-ray, because that's not very healthy, but some sort of scan where they can track what's happening in your body. Until the moment of eruption, a scream and a laugh are indistinguishable. You don't know what it's gonna be until it actually happens. And I think the slasher really capitalizes on that really, really well. And talking about Jonesy, I think I always suspected that Stephen King was aware of the cat in the closet thing really intimately, such that in Pet Sematary he thought, well, what if the cat was the killer? What if Church was really evil?
That's a very good point. Yeah.
So with this like zigzag thing that we're talking about, when you're writing, is that something that you're using as like a structuring mechanism, or is it just something that emerges out of the process of writing for you?
I think the second. I think it emerges kind of naturally. I think if I were to try to strategize it, then I would mess it all up. I would telegraph my intentions and I wouldn't get out of it in a clean way. So I think what happens is I realize I'm getting kind of bored. I need a laugh or a blood gag or something,
You mentioned in one of your interviews that I was reading that you don't outline, which is very, I mean, I'm very jealous basically, but like I need to, but it reminds me, you're mentioning Stephen King earlier, and I know you're a big fan of his work, of course. Who isn't, but he also talks about not outlining and just sort of starts writing, or he has a concept, starts writing and just lets it flow, and then he ends up 3 weeks later with a 500-page book. It's very surprising to me that you're able to do that, but you're also very prolific, so it's clearly working for you.
It's a lot of work to write like that because I really think that people who world build or outline and people who don't do that get to the same place. It's
Mhm.
just it's different routes to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I think of the story terrain as an island, like somebody who outlines or world builds or both, they before they ever set pen to paper for that first sentence, they know the socioeconomic history of this place. They know the climate. They know where everything is. They have a map of it in their head and probably written out somewhere. Me, I just parachute down into a big blank space and I have to walk around to find the shore and I have to walk around to find the dead ends and in the caves, the mountains, all that. At the end of the project, I've walked across the whole island and it's all like Technicolor come alive behind me as I step into it. And so we've gotten to the same place, the people who plan and the people who don't. It's just I think to me, it feels like more work to do it the way I do it. It feels less efficient because
Yeah,
I do go down a whole lot of dead ends.
yeah. I was gonna say, does that process of exploring the island look like doing 10 drafts of something before you
Yeah,
find the right
it
way
kind of
through?
does. Yeah. Yeah, it does. And it involves erasing the last 15,000 words, which kind of hurts.
Hmm.
But I really feel like those 15,000 words that I have to delete, they function as kind of like a strange attractor. They still exert a gravitational influence on the narrative, even though they're invisible and absent,
Hmm.
you know?
Well, I
I like.
make the point to people that they're like whatever pre-work you do, whether it's outline or writing a
Mm,
draft and deleting 15,000 words, it's
mm,
like the cranes that build skyscrapers. They're not there when the skyscraper's done, but they built it. Like they're
Mhm.
yeah.
part of it.
Yeah, for sure. I
I
totally
like to
agree.
think of it as like in oil painting, how you paint over everything again and again and again, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
the 10 layers of depth that gives you
It does.
the
Yeah.
finished feel.
And talking about drafting, I've always felt that you write your first draft with your heart, and then in revision, that's when you use your brain.
Mhm.
Like thinking to me is totally not helpful for writing because all it
Mhm.
does is make me second guess my decisions and feel the weight of all these other eyes looking at it, and that's not helpful. Like what I try to do is just in the first draft, I tell myself I'm writing for my 16-year-old cousin who is stoned 24 hours a day, and he's gonna giggle at everything I say.
Mhm.
So it's all golden, and I can just burn through and get something down on the page, and then when I come back to revise it, I can say that you know G through M is kind of stupid.
Mhm.
I can probably get from F to N a lot more efficiently than that, and revision is really, I mean, it's taxing but it's super rewarding because it's nice to see the threads come together in ways that I
Mhm.
didn't actually plan.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Now the real
So
question is, does that 16-year-old cousin's parents know that he's high 24 hours a day, or did you just out him through our podcast?
Yeah, man, he may be 17 now. I don't know.
also, is it your 16-year-old cousin who's high all the time, or is it you when you were 16 years old and high all the time?
I've known a lot of writers who do various substances to like write, and they sometimes get some really good stuff down. But I've also seen them they kind of flame out after two books, maybe three books, because I
Mhm.
think relying on stuff to write other than caffeine and anger,
Yeah.
that I think that burns you up in a way.
With the the Stephen King driving in the fog approach. I
Mm,
mean, Stephen King, Lord love him, he has some books that just sort of,
mm,
don't they don't arrive at their
mm,
destination.
mm, mm.
With that sort of instinctive approach, how do you end up with something that feels tight and focused? Is that just the horrible effort of like revision and revision and revision?
It is revision, and it's also being willing to scrap the whole project. If it
Hmm.
like I've got a lot of books in the drawer that were fun premises and petered out, or were terrible novels and have a really strong ending, but they
Hmm.
don't have the complete package. And so I realized that I can spend my tires on this book for 8 more months and maybe I can make it halfway acceptable. But during those 8 months, I could also write two other novels that have a chance to be good, you know?
Well, you talk about with My
Mm,
Heart is a Chainsaw going through that process
mm,
over the course of like 10 years.
mm.
Or is it 10, 8, something like that?
Let's see, 2013. I think it was 8 years. Yeah.
8 years,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
just starting it, putting it away because it
Yeah.
didn't work, and then like completely changing the main character,
Mm-hmm.
starting it again, putting it
Mm-hmm.
away, and then figuring it out finally, and you end up
Mm-hmm.
with a great novel that I really
Thank you.
enjoyed. I can't wait to read the
Mm-hmm.
second one.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like that's somehow just like sometimes that's just the process. So like you put something in a drawer now, maybe it comes out 4 years from now and it's great.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what I think too. Like, yeah, with Chainsaw, that's the longest I've ever spent on a novel. Most novels that I've put away, I never get them out again. But like that, I was talking about a terrible novel with a good ending. I have this novel called The Hedonist Chronicles, which I probably wrote in about 2001, 2002, and it has the best ending of anything I've done. And I've tried to graft that ending onto various other books, and it doesn't work. It only works with that broken novel, which makes me so sad. I wish I could use it somewhere else, you know?
It sounds like you're having, reading your work, it really feels like when you're watching a movie where there's like a character actor who's too good for the movie that they're in and is just chewing scenery and having the time of their life. And there's something about reading your work that feels like that. There's just like this real sense of fun underneath it, and it really feels like you're having the time of your life when you're writing it. Like, can you talk about the role of joy in the writing process? Because so many of us so often feel it as this, this struggle, this work.
If writing was not fun to me, I wouldn't do it. I just want to do fun things, it sounds like a kindergartner. I know. I just want to eat ice cream. I don't want to do math. But to me, it's always a mystery. I hear other writers like talking about the terror of the blank page, or how to get across 350 pages, and just how much work it is, and how they love to be done, but they don't love to actually be doing it. And I've never understood that. To me, sitting here at the keyboard and diving head first and heart first into another world where the stakes are high and everything is almost melodramatic, it's all screechy and fun. I call that playing with dragons, and I would much rather play with dragons than mow the lawn. Like, I feel like I write to hide from responsibility and to hide from the senselessness and violence of the real world, which is probably, maybe I should focus my efforts to try to make the world a better place in some fashion. But I'm a wimp, so I just write, But I remember years ago somebody asked Louise Erdrich. They said, "So writing is really hard, isn't it?" Which is not that great of a question. And her answer was, well, it's sure not digging sugar beets, because I've had a lot of agricultural manual labor jobs. I used to be one of those guys like Machete, who stands down at the corner downtown with a shovel and waits for a truck to pull up, and you get in and you don't know what you're getting paid, you don't know where you're going, but you're getting a few bucks somehow. I've done a lot of that kind of day work, and that's actually work. But sitting here and playing with dragons, that's just fun. I race to it. It never feels like a chore. I guess that's what I'm saying. To me, writing is never a chore. Sometimes it's a slog because I'm in a story quandary, or I've got notes that I'm having a hard time incorporating. I mean, that can feel like work, and that's not always the most pleasant. But
that's not writing, that's revising.
Yeah, that's revising. Yeah. And but what I do in those slugs, those revision slugs, is remind myself that this is going to be rewarding in the end. It's going to get to a product that's better than it was,
I think people can feel, I think for me personally, like going through writer's block in my earlier 20s and sort of getting through that, I think one of the things that happens is that what you're writing isn't that good. And so you convince yourself that writing is really hard, but in reality, you just aren't good enough at it yet. And the truth is, just like anything else, it's just practice. Like no one would say that practicing the piano is hard. What they say is like playing the piano well is hard. And it's like, you just need to sit there and just like put your reps in, like just write from start to finish. And what I've been finding recently, not to, make this about my personal process, but like I'm working on screenplays and scripts right now. And I started with like the shortest format that I had to write, which was about under 20 pages. And then I just slowly just wrote longer and longer scripts. And by the time I got to the 60-page one, I was like, this is great. This is easy. This is like fun now. Because I did it, because I did my reps, because I did the work. And I think that's the thing that people try and jump into writing a novel straight like first thing. And it's like, it's just too much. Like it's not easy, because it's a lot.
It can be overwhelming and daunting for sure. I always think of people talk about writer's block, and number one, I always think that, like I said earlier, like writer's block is really just too high of standards, like kind of like what you're saying, But two, like you can ask the waiters get waiter block, the plumbers get plumbers
Yeah.
block. And you know what? Yeah, they do. They wake up at 7 in the morning. They're like, I do not want to go to work, but they go to work anyways, you know? And I think that's what writers have to do. If they don't know what comes next, or if it's something they don't want to face on the page, you don't get to, like, going on social media and casting about like a tragic romantic figure is not going to help you do it. You know,
Yeah.
it's going to maybe get other people to commiserate with you, but I don't think that's terribly helpful either. You just got to sit there and pound through it, you know?
I'm actually running. I'm creating a workshop all about writer's block right now.
Nice.
And I agree with what you're saying, where like a lot of it is just like having high standards. But I think the other thing that happens is people don't actually know what writing is. Like they don't understand what the process is, or like how it's done, or how you are to be led through the process by like a big thing about what I'm writing about in it is actually what you're saying, which is that it's about finding yourself in it and being happy and like enjoying the process, because that's how you're going to write something that other people will like too.
Totally agree. And you know, Neil Gaiman says the like click over point for him in realizing how to do good writing was he realized he can't protect himself on the page. He has to be vulnerable on the page. He has to and be honest and truthful. You can't just like go in there and think I'm going to make everybody think I'm like, it's like when you're 14 and you put all your favorite band posters on the wall and wait for somebody to walk in and see the inside of your head and think it's amazing. You know, you can't do that on the page. That doesn't come across well. You've got to be willing to expose your heart and let people step on it.
Yeah, you got to write about something. Yeah. And if you're writing about something, it's about something that's in you, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And
for sure,
you got to put it out there.
Like with horror, what I tell people is the only way to do good horror is write about your own personal terrors. If you like think drowning is scary or spiders are scary, you can't just write a spider novel or a drowning novel, because it's like generic. It's not particular to you. You know, I mean, maybe that is your terror. Maybe you're afraid of water spiders. I don't know. And yeah, it's like me. One of my big terrors that I have a lot of nightmares about is I fall down a set of stairs and I get down there and I'm not knocked out, but I have hurt myself, and I look at my arm and it's split open, and inside, instead of blood and bone, it's just like white tofu, you know? And that just so terrifies me. I've written a novel on it, The Babysitter Lives, and I've done some stories on it, and just trying to exorcise that fear. But
yeah,
you know, I really like what Stephen King says. Somebody asked him once, you've got all these scary stories in your head. How do you sleep? And he said, I sleep fine. I give my nightmares away. And I really like the poeticness of that, I guess. But but at the same time, it doesn't work for me, because when I put my nightmares on the page, they just have higher resolution, and I see them around the corners. Yeah.
I'm trying to think now, like, have I ever written anything that's like come back and haunted me like extra hard because I wrote it? I did write I am scared of heights, and I did write something about the fear of heights, but like tied it into some other things that I'm also scared of.
Yeah.
But now I'm also living on the 28th floor of a building, so I can see out the window. I'm just like right now, I'm looking out the window. I'm just like, I don't like it out there. This balcony's getting zero use. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. Do you remember that old Gary Larson cartoon about that doctor's there's some drilling going on. Sorry about that. This doctor's revolutionary new therapy practice of dealing with all of the
snakes,
patient's
dark,
at once.
Fear of snakes, the dark, and heights. And it's like a dude in a steel chamber, like hanging over. Yeah.
And it's also, clearly not helping him.
Very funny you bring up Gary Larson, because like I like memorized Gary Larson as a kid. Like I know you're like, do you know this Gary Larson? I'm like, yeah, I know it. Yeah, don't worry. I got it.
He's got it tattooed on the back of his head like the girl in Rush Hour 3.
Yeah. I close my eyes. It's all Gary Larson cartoons.
I heard that he's got a new book coming out. Is that right?
Oh.
He's been if you go on his website, he's got some new comics up.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
I don't know if he's got a new book, but definitely new comics up there. He's just and they're still just as good as he was before. It's like the man.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's like Jordan coming out of his first retirement. He's just like as good as he was.
Nice.
Going back for a second to what you were talking about, like, you know, picking sugar beets and doing that kind of agricultural work, like that's really the world of your stories for me. Is this sort of like, you know, it's this like world of rural poverty, and now that you're like a university professor, there's this big change in class status there. How do you when your life changes like that, how do you hold on to what made your work real and vital, and how do you not let it change you?
I mean, I keep answering with Stephen King answers. I should have another writer that I quote, but the thing I'm probably most impressed with Stephen King across his career, across 60 plus books, is that ever since probably Salem's Lot or The Shining, he has been set for life, financially, but he nevertheless has never forgotten what it's like to work at a laundromat, live in a trailer, and not know if you're going to make rent and have to cut your telephone off and that kind of stuff. Which is to say, he writes about those conditions authentically, not like a tourist. And I always hold that up as my model. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm set for life financially or anything, but I am probably doing better than the characters in my stories, generally speaking. But I've never forgotten where I come from, I guess, and I don't think it's possible for me to either. Every once in a while I'll try to write a story about somebody who's like in some privileged position, and it's kind of fun, but it often ends up being a send up instead of like Jonathan Franzen will do it in a way that you feel their struggles. Or Brady Snellis is really good at that. These kids driving Mercedes and doing cocaine all the time. He writes about their internal struggles and how the world is not matching up with their romantic ideals and all this stuff. And he makes it feel super, super vital. And all that I, as a reader, am being trotted through is, does she like me? Does she not like me? Am I going to pass this class? Am I not going to pass this class? But he's able to make it so real. And I think that's because that's the world he comes from, and me, like, I really think writers only ever can write about the emotional landscape of a single place, and it's usually the place they grew up. I grew up in dirt poor West Texas, oil country, cotton country, cattle country. Like the local high school, the big dance every year is called Katoika for cattle, oil, and cotton. Like I can write a story set on Mars in 2789, and you peel up that dusty red planet, the surface, and it's going to be West Texas in 1985. I can't help that, and because of that, I mean, I guess my big hope for myself is that I don't forget where I came from. I'll never go back, but I hope I never forget it either.
I something that I wondered about, you've mentioned in interviews, or maybe it's just in your maybe it's a profile, but you've said something about how you're the only Blackfoot person in West Texas, maybe ever, or you and your immediate family. And I was doing some research because I was just curious about where you're saying you're the only one, so where are they? You're about as far away from those as you can get, right? Montana, but then also across the border in Alberta, and I think BC or Saskatchewan, one of the two.
Okay.
Did you ever have like a as a kid, did you ever want to go visit? Maybe you had relatives there, I'm not sure, but was it ever like a place that you would reach out to or go to? Like, was it sort of like and what was your connection? Because I think, like, I'm Jewish, and there's a thing that people always talk about where this idea of like going to Israel, and like I have a lot of problems with Israel, like a lot of problems, but going there is always this thing that you're supposed to want to do. It's supposed to be like a second home, and I really wonder if like what your experience was, knowing that you had a bunch of people that were you were quote unquote connected to, living across the country.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess I started going to the reservation in Montana probably when I was 11 or 12. That was my first time, and I've been going regularly ever since. But it was quite eye-opening to me, like going from being the only Blackfeet at my school, or the only Native at my school, period, to going up to a place where every face looked like mine and where my cousins looked just like me. It was really it's really nice not to be weird, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
And like I was just up there 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was just it's just so comfortable, and yeah, I mean, lots of people talk about like an ancestral homeland, like what you're talking about with Israel, and I do think there is something to that. And my question with it always is it something actually like that's in our muscle and fiber and souls and minds, or is it something socialized into us? I'm not sure,
like if you're told from like really, really young age that there's this place, there's this place, and then you finally go, well, of course it's going to feel like home.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. So that place for me was England, and it sucked there. So.
I mean, but they hate it too, so maybe so you were experiencing the true feeling of a homecoming.
The real thing.
I was sitting at a table in Spain with a couple of people who were from London, and I was supposed to go to London in a week or two or something. And I said I can't wait to go to London because I hear the food is bland, and I love bland food. I love like I don't really. It's not that I don't care how food tastes. I just don't want food to taste exciting, or I think food is just fuel you put in your body, and you should get it over with in 5 minutes and go do something else, you know. And so I told them, I said I can't wait to go to England because I hear the food is wonderfully bland. And they were quiet for a bit, and then one of them said, "That is the sickest burn I've ever heard on London in my life."
Wonderfully bland.
This is why he produces so much writing. He's not busy eating like me.
Yeah, he's not busy cooking like I am.
Yeah, I fucking love food.
Yeah, I'm making food all the time. Oh man.
I just really, this past year I was in Virginia with Sarah Langan, Grady Hendrix, Paul Tremblay, maybe somebody else. And for the first time in my life, when I was 51 years old, I tried a corn dog, and it was pretty good. I liked corn dog. I never knew how to like corn dogs, you know.
And that's the beginning of the end of your writing career.
That is totally. I agree. Also, in the past 18 months, I've experimented with putting like a shake or two of pepper on my scrambled eggs, and
oh my god,
and it's a little crazy, and it's like hot in my mouth, and then my stomach is hot for like 2 hours later. So I'm not going to do it a lot, but I can do it if I have to. If I'm in a situation where I'm in a prison and they put pepper on my eggs, I think I can eat them, you know?
I was about to suggest if you really, I want to I don't want to blow your mind or anything, but there's this thing called furikake, which is a Japanese like spice mix thing.
Oh,
it's
wow.
one of the best things to put on eggs, and I promise you it's not spicy.
Oh, okay. Furikake.
Yeah,
wow.
I'll email your publicist the spelling.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
I actually wanted to because this is very interesting because like you're talking about how much you don't care about food, but something that I notice in your writing, you have a very good, and you mentioned it just earlier about like being in Colorado, walking out in the meadow, seeing a bunch of columbine flowers, and you were like specific. You said didn't just say flower, you went back and you changed it to columbine flower. You really reference flora and fauna of regions that you write about, and it's a big part of the specificity of your work and this richness. I know you don't. I know that you don't outline, but do you research this kind of stuff, and is that part of your process?
I don't research much at all. I far prefer to lie convincingly, you know, and it's really fun for me to like push things that feel true into the world and then people believe them, you know. Like in one of my books in Demon Theory, I remember I have a little footnote about how Phil Collins wrote that song In the Air Tonight about having watched Jason Voorhees drown in Friday the 13th, you know, and I slipped it in like fact. And then I was having lunch with somebody a few years ago, and they mentioned that. They said, I never knew Phil Collins was a slasher fan. And I like had to lean forward and say, you know, I made that up. But no, research is not what I'm good at nor interested in. However, this comic book I'm doing, Earth Divers, because it's all centered around and structured by Christopher Columbus's first crossing of the Atlantic, I've had to do a lot of research on that, and that has been a completely different ride for me. It's been really productive too. It gave me a scaffolding to kind of follow. And the second arc is about the Declaration of Independence right at the moment of signing in early July 1776. And so I had to look up all the players and all the tensions and everything. And it's really weird for me to do research, and I think it's teaching me that I should keep things set in about the 80s on, because I know that stuff. I don't have to look that stuff up.
Well, you know? but you do have like a lot of awareness of you know, I and Alexander and I were talking about this right before the call, but we were talking about how, you know, there's like the depth of detail to what you're writing.
Mm-hmm.
And you say that you don't do research, but you
Mm-hmm.
clearly know at least some of the things that you're talking about
Yeah.
extremely intimately.
Yeah.
And, whether it's stuff that you personally have experienced or maybe it's in
Mm-hmm.
things that you've read,
Mm-hmm.
nothing is ever vague or referred to in vague terms. Like I'm thinking like in The Night of the Mannequins, which was, I loved, you reference these like very specific mannequin based pranks. And you don't just do one, which I think is the thing that a lot of writers would do, where they do one and then they say, and more pranks like that. You have like 4 or 5 different ones, and then you allude to even more of them. And, or in like My Heart is a Chainsaw, you've got these like sub stories that are like how to properly transport like a dead elk across a lake, or like how to drive a golf ball that's on fire. And how do you approach these things with such specificity? It sounds to me like this is just stuff that makes you happy as a writer, beyond that. But like, yeah, where do these things kind of come from for you?
You're right. They do make me happy as a writer when I read them or when I write them. But at the same, too, I think like specificity and granular details, just the particular, makes it a single place instead of like a distillation of places, And it's like, to me, horror needs to be set in the real world, in our world, in order to scare you, because the only mechanism it has to scare you is, this might be in my closet, this might be down the street from me, and so if I've got a world where there's centaurs and the moon whistles a tune every night, that's not our world. I don't think that's going to be scary. That can have some disturbing imagery in it, but it's not going to be scary to me anyways. So the way that I try to jack up the resolution, when I say jack up, I mean like turn up to 11, the resolution, is doing the particularness, of getting that elk across the water, and like, and talking about the granular details, like stuff in the nose with mud so that the air doesn't escape, like those little mechanical things are always so fascinating to me. And if I had to identify the moment I got infected with that, I think it would be reading Neil Stephenson's Cryptonomicon whenever it came out, like, what was that, 96 or 98, something like that. Because he is, as far as I'm concerned, he's about the best at that. Well, he's the best at like those granular details, but also at staging this exposition or this info dump in a way that it's dramatic, that it matters. Like, it's easy to come up with a Wikipedia entry on this or that and drop into it and then transition out, but that's kind of boring. Neil Stephenson has a way of doing it where it's fun and exciting, and I'm not as good as him yet, but I'm always trying to be.
What do you think the trick is for that?
Probably the first trick is having it be fascinating to the characters. I would think, because it's always got to be a fascination that comes from the book. It's like jacking it, like dialing the microscope down tighter and tighter, has got to be something that the characters are, in a sense, hungry for, rather than me showing off how deep a dive I can do. Because the point at which a narrative or story, whatever, starts feeling like I am showing off, that's the moment at which the story is indulging itself, and I have to back off. Like in The Only Good Indians, near the end, there's a really key battle on the basketball court, a game of 21, and we come into the game at the 16th point, and we go up to the 20th point. We don't go to 21, I don't think. And my impulse with that was to start at the very first dribble of the first point and take it all the way to the end. But then I realized that that's just me looking at fun basketball moves. The reader is not going to tolerate that, And so it is sometimes a matter of anticipating what is going to look like indulgence, And one place I always have to pull myself back is with cars or El Caminos or trucks, because I can talk about those forever and ever and ever. Like, there was a long while in my output where I could identify why I wrote this novel, and it was always because of a 67 Ford truck or a 69 El Camino. And I just case it in all these characters and world. Look, I really just want to talk about that El Camino. That's what I love,
That's fascinating. For me, like, and I think this is why I dialed in on it in your writing, but for me, it's like, it's nature, it's flora, it's fauna, it's like knowing the names of the things around me. But like, I have to dial back when I'm writing about something, or sometimes avoid nature altogether, because I know that I'll just be like, okay, now we're talking about like this specific species of jumping spider and the fact that it eats other spiders, and like that's what's interesting to me. And we're forgetting about the zombies or the whatever, the half man, half beast thing that's running around.
For sure. Like, and I think the reason I do tend to be in nature more than in the city is just because that's where I grew up. I grew up out in the fields, out in the trees, out hunting and everything. That was my life for so long. I sometimes feel when I write about like New York City or Chicago or Boston or one of the big cities, I feel like I always take steps to keep it to a single house or to keep it to interiors because I think there are rhythms and patterns in cities that I'll never be aware of. Like even when I go to Denver, I'm like a tourist. I'm always looking up at the tall buildings, and they're still pretty amazing to me. I can't imagine how people can be up there and everything. And I think when I say patterns, like I suspect that someone who has lived in New York City their whole life can anticipate when a bodega is about to happen, I can't. It's just like another wonder, like, wow, there's another one. But at the same time, it put me in the woods, and I can probably tell you the most likely place you're going to see an elk, because that's natural to me. But it's not natural to me the placement of bodegas or the hidden places gas stations are, or awnings or doormen. Just there's so many things that I don't know about city life, and so for that reason, like you mentioned, Brush Dogs. Brush Dogs was the most natural story to me in the world. I wrote it in 2 hours because I forgot I had a deadline and I had to do it real fast. and when I've forgotten I have to do something and I do it real fast, I'm almost always in the woods.
Well, the core of that story is, if I'm not mistaken, it's about like I don't know where the story. The sort of, it's not really an evil force, but the force in that story, the supernatural force in that story, I'm not sure where that comes from, like if that's a story that you heard as a kid or anything like that. But it's sort of about like a person going into the woods and coming back changed, let's say. Like almost like a changeling child, but a different version of it. Where did that come from? This is honestly just for me at this point. But
I think it came from, that story first appeared in a book, like a tribute to Laird Barron, who at the time he was doing a whole lot of cosmic horror. And because I knew it was supposed to be a like Laird adjacent story, I thought I better make this cosmic. And cosmic horror is nearly always about encountering something so vast you can't even see the edges of it, and you're not out to defeat it, you're out to survive it, and then have to live with the awareness that exists, and so I also don't know where the malignant force comes from in Brush Dogs. I just know that they saw a ragged edge of it and it did this to them.
Wow, that's dark. It's a great story. I think it's on like Nightmare Magazine's website. So anybody wants to listen, or I think you can also listen to it, but anyone wants to read it, that's where it is.
So, yeah.
So I wanted to bring this back to slashers. I'm really enjoying this very detailed writing conversation, but so
let's get to the real shit.
Yeah, let's get to the real shit. Let's get to slashers. You can't see this, but Steven is wearing a shirt that just says slashers,
which is honestly a bit on the nose, but I like it.
I just think it's a really unique choice for anybody to work in. Like, and you yourself mentioned this in I think multiple texts, multiple interviews, multiple books, but that it had its golden age in the 80s, and then the permutations of the slasher since then have been sequels or remakes of popular franchises, or they're kind of, they're postmodern, they're commentaries on the genre. Scream, New Nightmare, Cabin in the Woods, American Psycho, even. While it is its own kind of slasher. I'm just curious, like, what draws you to it in the modern era? Like, what is it about it right now that feels good to you? And good to your readers too, for that matter.
Thank you. I think what it is I feel a distinct unfairness in the world. I keep seeing people at various podiums on the news, and they'll say something terrible or do something insulting, and they just walk away, and bullets, like everything washes right off their back, and that to me would not happen in a slasher. In a slasher, like in, what is this? Is this Friday the 13th? It might be 6. There's that caretaker for a cemetery who drinks all the time. He's in the cemetery at night, and he finishes the bottle and throws it over his shoulder, which is to say he's littering, and he doesn't hear it hit, and he looks around, he's like, what's going on? And sure enough, Jason's there. He's caught the bottle, and he kills the heck out of him for littering, which is probably overkill. I don't think you should necessarily be eviscerated for littering, but I think that, like, when the slasher first happened starting in maybe 74 or 78, but the 80s were the heyday for sure, the golden age. I feel like they were all kind of parables tailor made for the latchkey generation. All these kids coming home from school who were on their own to deal with bullies at the park or intruders in their house or whatever. Their parents were not there. In slashers, parents are never there, or if they're there, they're useless, like in Nightmare on Elm Street. And I think, I mean, that was part of the reason we had that first golden age. And another reason was it was the height of the Cold War, and everybody had moved to the suburbs away from the cities. And that I think the slashers reminded us that there is still terror, that you look out your bedroom window and you see Jason out there in silhouette in the moonlight, and he's got a machete that rises up. But I think for a lot of people, it wasn't a machete. It was a missile. I think that's what the slashers were really. They were reminding us of. They were tailor made for the latchkey kids and for their parents. They were reminding them that total destruction is still right outside the window. Just moving 30 miles outside the city does not necessarily make you safe. But yeah, nowadays I think the I don't know, the social function of the slasher is to let us imagine a world in which things are brutally just, and the slasher is a justice fantasy. And I don't think I want to live in the slasher world, but I like to imagine that sense of fairness anyways.
Yeah. So how can you keep a slasher from feeling preachy then? How, like, if the slasher is this sort of like really kind of like didactic form, how do you keep it from being just like a morality play?
A big part of it is the fun factor, just keep the people giggling and screaming. But yeah, coming out of the 80s, a lot of people's distillation of the slasher were that they were morality plays, because these kids having sex, doing drugs, whatever, they were always getting chopped. But I've always subscribed to what John Carpenter says, which is, yeah, Michael kills people when they're in bed, but it's not because he's punishing them for having sex. He's really just an opportunist. He's like, well, they're naked, they're distracted, they're wrapped in sheets. My job is a lot easier right now than it would be if they were ready, and also the kids who are inebriated in whatever fashion, yeah, they tend to get killed. But that's the same thing as being, if your mind is clouded, you're much easier prey. It's not about Jason, Michael, Freddy, Ghostface, whoever punishing them. It's about the ease of killing them, I think. But that doesn't quite answer your question. How do you keep the slasher from being didactic?
I don't mean it in terms of like the morality of like having sex and stuff like that. I mean about the sort of like original sin that underlies the whole like cycle of justice and retribution.
No, for sure. I wonder if, I think the 80s slashers, the golden age slashers, can, by someone who is not reading it that closely, be read as a morality play more than the post Scream slashers. And I think the reason for that is the final girl changed. In the original like iterations of the slasher, which was just an avalanche of slashers, the final girl would be the girl who happens to have made it through various encounters with the slasher, and at the end they turn around and face the slasher and often put that slasher down. They find it in themselves to do that. After Scream, where Sydney, the final girl, is, before the slasher ever starts, she's dealing with issues. She's trying to figure out how to properly grieve her mother, or she's trying to live with the absence of her mother anyways. And after that, you start seeing more, like in urban legend, you see it. There's so many slashers where you see the final girl coming to the horror with issues already, and then this horror adventure led by the slasher allows her to process through those issues. And so it becomes a character driven story, which people don't think of slashers as character driven. I think they are in that sense. And I think if you can keep it character driven, then it resists the abstraction, which can lead to it being didactic. Or that's my hope anyways.
Okay.
I think that makes sense. And I think the other thing is when you give the slasher their own motivation, like there's definitely this like character driven on both sides, basically. Like what you said about Michael Myers being this guy who just like, or John Carpenter saying about he just kills people because those are opportunistic opportunities for him to do that. But that's not, that's not the experience that those teenagers are having. They're having a very different one. And the reason that one of them survives is through doggedness and determination and being aware and
vigilance
and being vigilant, which just so happens to be the thing that Michael preys on. So then you've got these two characters colliding at that point.
That's a good way to say it. Yeah, and it becomes like a church steeple the way you did your hands. That's
Yeah.
kind of fun.
Well,
Which is preachy all over.
Well, I was thinking also about, a really good example of
Mhm.
what you're describing is Nightmare on Elm Street, where you have
Mhm.
like almost three different character driven arcs there, where you have
Mhm.
Freddy who's trying to avenge himself.
Yeah.
And doing it in this like really horrifying way. You have the
Mhm.
kids, who are realizing their version of the story, which is that your parents can't always protect you. And
Mhm.
even if they try and succeed in one way, they'll fail in another. But then you also have the parents' perspective, which is that they can't protect their kids, which is its whole own version of a horror movie.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And they're
That's
all
like
just
three
kind of,
intersecting. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, and they're all character driven. They're all moving in the same direction. And that movie
Yeah.
really doesn't feel didactic at all. It just feels like
No.
scary. It just feels like a
Yeah.
good horror movie.
Yeah, and that movie takes a lot of left turns too, and I think those left turns like that seem to be out of nowhere, but that fit the basic like those three narratives you're talking about. I think that's another way to keep the reader like wrong-footed, and when you can keep the reader wrong-footed, they don't know what's going to happen next. Then I think they have a more difficult time extracting a morality, a lesson, or
Totally.
something. You know?
Yeah. And or they're able to at the very least interpret it through their own lens, which always makes it feel more the work feel more complete because you have to sit and think.
Yeah, if you can make the reader or the audience complicit in the creation of the horror, then you've got them. If it's happening in their head without you having to say it, then that's what you want, man.
You were mentioning earlier that the slasher is sort of this genre of the suburbs, which I thought was a really interesting contrast to how you were talking about how your own psychic landscape is the landscape of rural West Texas. Why do you think that you became so drawn to this genre of the suburbs when that's not sort of where you feel most at home?
That's a good point. I mean, I have lived in a lot of suburbs, but you're right. I grew up where I couldn't see another light at nighttime. We were so remote. I think it's probably just mechanical, actually. Like slashers need a certain density of bodies to carve through, and where I grew up, it's hard to get that density. Like trick-or-treating for me was kids in their bulky costumes. We all pile into the back of a Buick, like 10 of us in the back seat of a Buick, and we drive 16 miles to one house, 10 miles to the other house, and for a slasher, I don't know if a slasher's going to put in that legwork,
Just walking, dragging a heavy sledgehammer that whole time. Forget about it.
Yeah, it tends to work better like Cain and See No Evil, like if somebody has staked out, this is my abandoned hotel. If you come here, I'm chopping you, or Jason with Crystal Lake,
Yeah. Tie themselves to a location that will become dense. It's a slash at home, slash from home, work from home revolution.
Or Michael claims Halloween night, Freddy claims dreams.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. They all have like little hunting grounds, little territory. Yeah. I wanted to ask about you mentioned this idea that slashers speak to justice fantasies. And I think that makes a lot of sense, especially when we consider that many of the main characters in your novels are native from different backgrounds in some of them. Is that specifically sort of, do you see like that linkage right there between, because like you're kind of the guy in slashers right now. Like there aren't really people making things that are as popular as the stuff that you're making right now, and putting these native or indigenous characters front and center, it feels very specific. Like you are saying something very specific there.
Oh yeah, well thank you for noticing that, and thank you for saying it. Yeah, I think slashers and native concerns are in lockstep, because what we want all across America, on every reservation, every native household, every Indian community, is revenge, and that's what the slasher is about, is revenge. We want to see the people who came over here and cut our hands off and enslaved us and raped us. We want to see some justice. We want things to come full circle, and like that's why like all these UFO hearings, which aren't getting enough attention, I don't think, but like the idea of aliens coming with their superior technology and their germ warfare and stuff, I think those of us in Indian America were like, hey, it's your own medicine, take it,
Yeah, I'm thinking about the Screwfly solution, Alice Sheldon. That's one of my favorite things I've read recently. She's the best.
Yeah, that ending for that is beautiful, isn't it?
Right? Oh my god. No spoilers to anybody, but go check it out if you can. But I think, obviously in Canada we're having a lot of the same issues and as we should, with additional, layers of Canadianness on top of it, which means so many different things that I can't get into it right now. But I promise you. And I think about things like, did you ever read Algernon Blackwood? Any of his stuff?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I think about like the willful misconstruction of native characters and native issues in other horror. And Algernon Blackwood writing about the Wendigo, but having absolutely no understanding of what that actually represents, and that specifically the Wendigo is kind of about him. And things like that. And it's really amazing to watch, just like, I was also reading Thomas King, and he talks about how, what does a native person look like? And the answer is basically whatever native people tell you, without getting, there's a lot more detailed thing. And it's just really great to see these characters front and center of the front and center.
It's like it feels like a recentering to me, and I mean, there's multiple recenterings. I don't want everything in the world to pivot around us, I think there should be multiple nodes,
totally.
And all kinds of stuff. And you're right about Blackwood writing about the Wendigo. I mean, that's a spooky story, no doubt. But it's, to me, the horror of that story draws a lot more from like Caribbean traditions than it does from native traditions.
That's a good point. Yeah. It's.
But I also think, like, Lovecraft, people talk about him a lot and like why he's persisted all this time. And I think it's as simple as his name. He's got a really cool name, but I think Blackwood should have been in that conversation because he has the coolest name too.
His name's fucking great.
Have you ever thought about getting a nom de plume?
I so wish I would have done that when I was starting out, because it's too late now. Like, I go back to my old, like my my mid '90s publications, and I'm never Stephen Graham Jones. I'm always Stephen Jones, which is weird to me. Like, I'm the British editor, and I'm not that dude for sure. Although when we're at the same hotel, things get really confusing. But for a long time, I had to, because Stephen Jones was on the scene by the time I came on the scene with novels, I had to use my middle name to distinguish who I was. And there's also a Stephen Jones who plays guitar. Was he in the band Blackfoot, maybe? Anyway, which is confusing.
Oh my god.
I could be wrong about that. He might be though. But because my full name is so long and bulky, for the longest time, whatever anthology I showed up in, I was never on the cover because my name took up too much real estate. It took up like two people's names,
Yeah. Well, Alexander, your grandfather's not using his nom de plume anymore.
Yeah. He used his mother's maiden name, so that's
nice.
Nice. That's the way. Nice. I think
that's the move.
This is
Jonah Royston.
Jonah Royston.
That's
good.
Yeah, that's a good
I was talking to George R. Martin once, and I'm talking to him about how ridiculous it was that I have this long name, and he said his career never like really catalyzed until he had been George Martin for a long time, and then he stuck those two R's in the middle, and like everybody was like, "Oh, you're him."
This
like everything changed. Yeah.
We need more initials. I got a bunch to choose from. I got 3 middle names. I can do whatever I want.
Nice.
If you had just been Stephen G. Jones, then you would have been a literary author.
That's right.
Oh, that's
true.
You'd have
written a great American novel. Yeah.
No, for sure.
Just you were saying this other thing earlier about the sort of writing from an emotional landscape that you understand and that you inhabited, the one that you grew up in. And this kind of goes with that. But, I love one of the things that you're really great at is you write from the voice of characters that maybe don't have the best luck when it comes to, things like upbringing and education, as we were talking about. And it's not that they're unintelligent. I'm thinking of Jade specifically. But the circumstances, the vocabulary that you're going to use for these characters are going to change depending on their circumstances. Do you ever feel challenged by that when you're writing? Like there's a scene in My Heart is a Chainsaw where it's kind of the first scene where Jade really has a long conversation with a group of people sort of towards the middle when they confront her about that letter that she wrote. I'm trying not to do spoilers.
Yeah.
And what struck me about that scene more than anything else is it's like, oh my God, they all talk differently from her. And like very different. And it suddenly feels like not only is she having a conversation for the first time, but also that her entire reality is being intruded on. And it's a great turn, a great piece of writing. And I wonder, Do you ever feel challenged by that? Do you ever feel challenged by writing in these different perspectives?
I do, yes. And like that scene particularly, I think the reason that I'm tried to, and thank you for noticing, the reason that I tried to make them all to make their worlds different by making their language different, you know, or their diction level anyways. Because I've written so much stuff where people will tell me I can't tell your characters apart by the way they speak, you know, and that kind of herded me back onto the path of making sure that I was doing that. But the first time I encountered that like difficulty was with my very first novel, The Fast Red Road, because it deals a lot with I say a lot. It deals somewhat with quantum mechanics and different theories circulating around that. And my character in it is an indentured stagehand in the porn industry, you know. And I'm not saying that an indentured servant in the porn industry can't have a high diction level, but he had also not gone to school and all this stuff. And so how is he going to talk about this? And I guess what I did in that case was I kind of went back to my own high school experiences where I rarely went to high school. I'd always be doing something else. I like one semester I had like 84 truancies and there were only 82 days in the semester. I don't know how that happened. You know? But where my mom would find me was behind a box in the garage reading physics books because that just fascinated me so much, you know? And so I had to, instead of dialing his vocabulary and like thought down, I just went back and changed his upbringing kind of, or his past. I found that's always I'd rather do the work to establish that somebody knows this stuff than to not allow them to know it, if that makes sense.
Totally, yeah. And I think that's the beautiful thing about writing is everything is mutable, everything can be changed, and you can if you're trying to tell a certain kind of story, you're trying to communicate something specific, you can just tweak some knobs, you know, to hit the TV because it's staticky, and then all of a sudden it's working. Like
exactly. That's also the biggest difficulty I've encountered with writing comic books, because I'll get to issue 6 and I realize I should have done something in issue 2, but issue 2 has been on the shelf for 3 months and I can't do it anymore. And I can't. Oh no. Maybe somebody else can come in and retcon it, but I can't do it at the moment. And so you're locked in with comic books. You know, when I first started writing Earth Divers, I asked my friend Daniel Kraus, whose book Whalefall is coming out here like immediately, and I asked him because he had just done a little limited series called The Autumnal, which was really good. And I said, how did you do that? How did you keep it all in your head and month by month? And he said, oh, it was easy. I just wrote it all at once. And I thought, oh, that's the way to do it. Just write the whole arc at once. Yeah. But of course I didn't do that. I had the solution and I didn't even use it. You know?
That's how it is, isn't it? You're like the final girl in the slasher who throws the machete away.
Yeah, exactly.
You gotta hold on to it.
I know.
You got to bury that axe when you're 11.
Yeah, exactly. I so love you. Y'all were talking about Cabin in the Woods earlier. I so love it. My favorite moment of that movie, I think, is when what's her name? Dana, the main character, when she has got I think it's a knife, in the basement. She like gets it and it's like this can be a weapon, but then back in the control room they hit a button and it makes a little shock in the hand.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You know? And you'll blink and you'll miss that moment, but then you understand why Laurie throws a knife away after she stabs Michael in the neck with that crochet or knitting needle, whatever it is, you know?
Yeah, she's not supposed to have it.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question about you're technically Dr. Stephen Graham Jones, unless Wikipedia is wrong. And as you were talking about, you teach. I believe you do teach creative writing, but also I assume other courses as well.
Yes.
And I know I went to University of Toronto. I actually studied science. Alexander was in philosophy, history, and I knew a few of the profs who taught creative writing. And they were all just like mainly literary fiction people, authors, or taught in that style. And I'm really curious, as someone, how do you approach teaching this as someone who works in the genre space and who does great work in the genre space? And when I say literary fiction, I just want to be clear. I'm talking the style. I'm not talking about the quality.
No, you're totally right. I remember I was on faculty at a different school probably about 2001, and we had a job candidate come through and he gave his big talk and it was on comic books, and I was like jazzed. I could not be more thrilled because I've been in the comic books forever. And I went to the meeting where we would all discuss, this prospect, and 2 or 3 professors stood up and said, this is an absolute no. We are not letting comic books into this program, and that just hurt my soul so much. And And yes, ever since writing programs came around in probably the mid 70s, there has definitely been, I guess I'd call it a prejudice against commercial or genre writing,
Mm-hmm.
in kind of a celebration of I don't want to be insulting because I love a lot of literary fiction, but fiction that doesn't engage werewolves or spaceships or elves,
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Michael Chabon
those
wrote this thing where he talks about how like literary fiction's great, but like
mm,
imagine if that was the only thing that anybody could write
yeah.
in, and it's
Oh
like
man.
eventually you would just get tired of it, and like that's
No,
all that there really needs to be said.
you definitely would. But like, My Heart is a Chainsaw, I originally wrote the first draft of that novel in 2013 because I had read Jeffrey Eugenides' The Virgin Suicides so many times
Mhm.
that I finally started wondering, what if I were to use this really deliberate delivery method for a story that was actually exciting, don't get me wrong, I love that novel, but it would be so much more exciting if there was somebody in a mask with a machete. I think that makes any story better. So I sat down and I wrote the first version of Chainsaw like that. So I get a lot of ideas from literary fiction. I just actually published a literary fiction story 5 days ago or something. I still mess around in that. The trick is literary fiction, unless you're like at George Saunders level or something, doesn't bring in the same advances or royalties as commercial
Nope.
or genre fiction at all. And which isn't to say that I'm doing genre just for the checks. I'm doing genre
Or
because
that
that's
the
my first
checks are
love.
great in genre.
Yeah, no. And when I came to grad school, I like when I was a philosophy major, philosophy English major,
Mm.
and I never planned to go to grad school. I was just going to go back home and farm. That was my only life plan ever, was to drive a tractor. And because when I drive a tractor, I can listen to the radio, and that makes me happy. I don't really need more than that. But and also I can wear shirts without sleeves, which I like doing. But
Get tenure, then you can
my
do it anytime you want.
yeah, no, man, yeah, but um, I my professors convinced me to put out applications for grad school, and I reluctantly put in one to philosophy school, one to English school, just to satisfy my professors. And then the English school got back first and said, "Hey, you can get free tuition if you come here." And so I said,
Nice.
"Well, I can delay farming for 2 more years," and that happened again with my PhD. But the deal I made with myself going into these programs, because I kind of had a sense what they're going to be about, was you can only do it if you go in ninja mode, which is to say, if you go in to steal all the craft techniques you can to port them back to the Western, to science fiction, to fantasy, to horror,
Mhm.
and while I was doing all that work, I did get kind of diverted onto the track of like Thomas Pynchon, John Barth, all those
Mhm.
those big doorstop books that are impossibly dense and don't totally make sense, but they're beautiful and wonderful, and I still love them. But for a while, I forgot that my beating heart that got me here was genre, and so
Mhm.
I wrote my novel The Fast Red Road in 98, and I realized that even though it's got like 40-foot tall coyotes and submarines in New Mexico, all this stupid, absurd stuff, that it wasn't quite genre. It was more like
Mm.
Donald Barthelme kind of cartoonish, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Which I don't mean to put myself in the same plane as Donald Barthelme, but it was kind of trying to access that same story space,
Yeah.
anyways. And so the second novel I wrote was Demon Theory, which came out in '06, but I wrote it in '99, and because I had to go back to where my heart was. I had to go back
Mhm.
to the genre,
Mhm.
and yeah, you're right. There is a lot of resistance to genre writing in writing programs, which is largely because the professors, nearly to a person, don't write genre.
Mhm.
They not even crime usually. I mean, I do know a few crime writers who are professors, but rarely do they ever write horror, science fiction, fantasy, and
Mhm.
used to on my syllabi for writing workshop. This was probably from 2000 to about 2008, I guess, 2007, somewhere around there. I would always have the very first statement be, in this class, one of your submissions is going to be a genre story. It can be
Mm.
a pirate story, it can be a zombie story, it can be a space alien story, but one of them is going to be genre, because I thought it was my duty to teach them to write things they could get paid by the word for, so they could get some money, because with literary stories starting out, you just get contributors copies, and
Mhm.
that's nice to put on your shelf and to pass out to somebody, but it doesn't buy any groceries, and I
Mhm.
wanted my students not to starve.
Mhm.
And from 2000 to 2007, every first day of class, there'd be hands going up, and they'd say, "This first thing, you mean I have to write about pirates?" And And I'd say, no, it can be an alien. And they would say, well, and they would get up and walk out. I would usually lose 3 or 4 people that first day.
Wow.
They would just like make a statement and walk out of class, you know?
That's wild.
It is. And then starting about 2008 or so, the students, to a person, they all came to class writing genre. So I didn't have to put that statement on my syllabi anymore. And to this day, this is 15, 16 years later, still almost every story I get is a genre story. And that could be partially because they know I'm a genre writer myself. So I could be like attracting that crowd more. And I tell them they can also write literary. I don't say you have to write genre, because literary can be great as well. But I don't have to put that statement on my syllabus anymore. There's been a big like sea change in the world. I don't really know what's happened, but something has happened to make things, to me, better.
How do you teach differently than people who are teaching the literary fiction course?
I think I expect more output than most people. Like my undergrads have to write a novella over the course of the semester.
Wow.
My grad students, or the intermediate, has to write a novella. The advanced have to write a novel. And if you don't, that's like a pass-fail project. If you don't write a novella or a novel, then you fail the class. And
Wow.
I've had people be on the verge of graduation, and they have 16 family members come, and they don't write the novel, so they don't get to graduate.
Damn.
You know?
Wow. You're like the slasher of professors.
Yeah.
Writing.
And also, I've never trusted my ability to objectively grade a piece of art, to say this is a B+ story, this is an A- story. I don't really trust myself to make that distinction. So what I do instead is I grade on mechanical correctness. And I have a list of things that I walk them through in the first week so they know it as well as they can. And one of them is direct address commas. They're going to lose 5 points off a 100-point, possibility for every direct address comma they skip. Like, hey Bob, I'm over here, requires 2 commas around Bob, and so for some reason people don't know direct address commas, and so I often end up with students who come out of their first submission with negative 20 points, so they can't get better than an 80 on their next one, and they usually don't do that. So I really want to send people out in the world at least being mechanically correct and somewhat clean, because that's the first thing an editor looks for, is, did they make mistakes? Is this person going to be a lot of work for me? And if you're a lot of work for them, they're less likely.
They're not going to read it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like when editors go through, sorry, that's my dog. When editors go through slush piles, they'll have 50 stories on their desk. They don't dive into that slush pile looking for gold. They dive into that slush pile looking for reasons to throw this one over their shoulder, Yeah,
it's a classic, like with screenplays, you got to have big things happening within the first 10 pages, not because it's necessarily good for the movie, but because if you want anything to get made, people have to be hooked enough to keep reading.
Exactly. And that dynamic is only intensified with movies being released on streaming, I think, because to you'd have to walk out of the theater and argue with the manager for your money back, but nowadays you just have to hit a button,
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. No one wants to give up that $12 easily. They want to, back in the day, they'd actually try and see if there's anything good for them there. Force themselves to sit through it.
Yep.
I think we're getting to, I think we're over time at this point, but I do want to ask before we.
Sorry.
You got to get back to writing. You got 10,000 words to write today, I'm sure. But I wanted to just before we go, I want to ask, are there any horror or non-horror books, movies, stories, anything that's been inspiring you of late? Anything you'd like to plug from other authors?
Yeah, I just now finished reading Brian McCauley's Curse of the Reaper, a slasher, which was really good. And I think just yesterday I finished Josh Winning's Burn the Negative, another slasher. It was really good. I'm currently reading Chuck Tingle's Camp Damascus, which is a blast so far. That dude really knows his way through a line. And next up on the queue is Christopher Golden's The House of Last Resort, I believe. I'm excited. I don't know when it comes out, but I always trust Chris's stuff. He's really competent,
But is Chuck Tingle's Camp Damascus as good as Chuck Tingle's Slammed in the Butt by My Own Butt?
Yeah, I know. I've seen all those covers, and I have not read those, and I probably should. Because
I've read a couple, because back when they very first started to get some attention, I read a couple, and I was like, oh, this is just very competent, funny writing. Like, this is just very well done. It's not as ridiculous as the title. It's just, I imagine, as good as, I imagine he's only gotten better, is I guess what I would say.
Yeah. No, and man, Camp Damascus, I'm really digging it so far. I'm completely impressed, and the important thing for me is I'm learning stuff. You know,
Yeah.
I love to see how other writers pull off tricks that I don't know how to do yet, and I can like port some version of that out and plug it into my own work. You know,
What's a trick from Camp Damascus that you've caught on?
you know, the important trick I've caught on there so far is his main character is this deeply conservative religious person, and he's writing about her earnestly. He's not setting her up to knock her down. You know, he is occupying a space that may not be supernatural for him to occupy, and he's doing it in a really authentic way. He's not pretending she's fake. He's accepting that she's real, and that's something that's so important. I think. Like I see a lot of writers, um, they'll let their own politics onto the page too much, as in they'll write about Donald Trump people or something, and they write about them as these buffoons who don't have a clue about anything. And I think that's not the right angle to take. That's not that's not flexing the empathy muscles that fiction is supposed to flex for us. You know, we should look at people who are not ourselves and try to. I mean, I'm not saying we should necessarily cross cultural lines or anything, but we should try to crawl into the headspace and heart space of people who are not ourselves, you know? And I think the world only gets better when we do that.
Yeah, it's just people struggle with that because they know that, or they think that those other people are not doing that for them. Like they're not like, if you're not going to crawl into my headspace, why should I crawl into yours? And then no one's ever crawling into anyone's headspace.
I know. Somebody's got to make the first move, you know?
Yeah. I something I always wanted to point out that I really just like zeroed in on while we've been talking that I really like is that you're always talking about how you like learning, like how you're not complete as a writer yet. And I think that that's such a good attitude to bring into the creative process.
Yeah. Like I always, sometimes for whatever reason, I go back and have to look at something I wrote 20 years ago. And I realized 20 years ago, I had tricks and muscles that I no longer have, you know, and now I have new tricks and muscles, but to me, it feels like writing technique, talent, craft, whatever you want to call it, is like a beaker or a cup, and you fill it up with like how to do this dialogue, how to do this transition, and you have all these little tricks, and it gets full, such that the next thing you learn, you pour it in, something else splashes out, you know? And so there's more tricks and technique than you can hold in that beaker, and you don't get a bigger beaker, you know? And so you're never going to be complete. You're always going to be having to learn new stuff and relearn stuff that you used to know, you know? That's the way it is with me anyways.
That's the Sherlock Holmes line where that's why he doesn't know that the earth revolves around the sun. Because he's like, if I hold on to that piece of information, I lose something else. And it doesn't help. It doesn't help him as a detective. So he threw it away.
Oh, nice. I never heard that. I like that.
Yeah. So last question, what are you working on these days? We talked a little bit about it. And is there anything that you know what? I'm going to ask this question in a different way. Usually I just say, is there anything you want people to check out? But is there like, if you could have all of our listeners read one thing that you've written, what would that be? That might be an impossible question, but I'm curious to hear what you say.
Yeah, that is hard. Man, I think The Only Good Indians would be a good starting place, probably.
Okay.
I worry. I mean, I love Chainsaw and Reaper. Don't get me wrong, but it's kind of the deep end of the horror pool, you know, a little bit. And Good Indians tricks you that this is going to be a shallower pool, and it's not. But it tricks you into thinking that. Hopefully, you know. But as for what I'm working on now, I just now, like 4 or 5 days ago, submitted my last tinkering with of The Angel of Indian Lake, the third Chainsaw book.
And very exciting.
And just today, I've been trying to, with my editor and my agent, select the cover for I Was a Teenage Slasher. And and my editor sent me a heads up. He said, hey, right as soon as the copy edits are done for Angel, we're starting on Teen Slasher. And so I'll be revising that. And the bad thing about all that is about 2 or 3 weeks ago, a novel happened in my head, and I wrote all the beats down. That never happens to me. You know, it's usually like I hear a voice and I just follow it and see where it goes. But this time it all happened in my head, and I want to start writing that novel so bad. But I need to do these notes on Teen Slasher first, on Teenage Slasher.
Wow, that's a lot of work.
Oh yeah, and also monthly, which is really daily.
Comic book.
Yeah, comic book Earth Divers. The thing I never knew about comic books is that I might well, I'll be looking at final lettering adjustments on issue 2 while I'm looking at inks on issue 4 while I'm looking at pencils and layouts for issue 6. I've got my fingers in like every pot possible, and I need more fingers because there's more pots with comic books than I have hands for and fingers.
I'm getting so tired listening to this so much. Well,
and also I'm still doing Zooms with all the studios and production companies who are interested in this or that, and even with the strike going on, this stuff is still happening.
Yeah, people want to talk. People want to they want to they know that at some point the strike will end because hopefully because the studios cave, and when that happens, they need to have their ducks in a row. Yeah.
And of course, it'd be nice to be one of those ducks, Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's been a genuine pleasure.
It's been such a fun time talking with you. I feel so excited and energized. I want to go and write a slasher, which I've never done before.
Wonderful.
This is great.
Wonderful. No, this has been great talking to y'all, man. It's nice to talk to people who are enthusiastic about fiction, stories, the world, horror, slashers. It's just it's so exhilarating for me.
Right back at you, man. Yeah. It's the best. So we'll say goodbye to all the listeners. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Check out everything that Steve mentioned. You can rewind. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but go back. And also
Only Good Indians.
Only Good Indians, I know. But there were a bunch of other stuff too. And also, happy birthday to you is out somewhere, Alexander.
Yes.
Get those royalties.
It's been in theaters 30 odd years ago, and you can find it on DVD in like the back bin of the only store in your town that still has DVDs, and like the part at the back where like the fluorescents are kind of flickering and there's a weird smell. You can probably find it there.
Call your local AMC and threaten them until they put it on the big screen.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.